All right, today we are diving deep into the life of one of the 20th century's most, well, consequential and controversial figures, to put it lightly, Joseph Stalin. His story is just this incredible paradox of power, terror, and the absolute transformation of a nation.
So, you've got to ask yourself, how does one guy rise up from poverty to become the supreme leader of a superpower? And not just that, but lead it to a decisive victory in the deadliest war in human history. And then, at the very same time, how is that same man responsible for a reign of terror that killed millions upon millions of his own people?
Right, that's the paradox we're digging into. To really get our heads around the man who was both the architect of Soviet power and of Soviet terror, we've got to go back to the beginning. Back to the man who gave himself the name Stalin, which, means man of steel. Stalin's journey wasn't exactly a fairy tale. He was born Iosif Jugashvili in a poor Georgian family. His mom actually wanted him to be a priest. But, well, his time in the seminary introduced him to some forbidden Marxist ideas. And by 1899, he was out, expelled, and chose a totally different path, professional revolutionary. His rise wasn't some lightning-fast climb to the top. No, it was a slow, methodical grind. He was the guy in the background, the organizer, the editor for the party newspaper. Then, after Lenin's death in 1924, the knives came out. A huge power struggle began, but by 1929, Stalin had systematically outmaneuvered every single rival, even the charismatic, brilliant Leon Trotsky.
So how'd he do it? It all came down to a job title that sounds, well, kind of boring: General Secretary. You see, while everyone else was giving fiery speeches and debating ideology, Stalin was quietly controlling the party machine. He put his own loyal people in positions all over the country. He built an unshakable power base. It wasn't charisma that got him to the top, it was paperwork and politics.
Okay, so once he had that iron grip on power, Stalin launched one of the most ambitious and, frankly, brutal transformation projects in history. He was determined to catapult the farm-based Soviet Union into the industrial age, and he didn't care what it cost.
And listen to this quote from 1931. It just says it all, doesn't it? You can feel the urgency, the paranoia, and you can hear him justifying the ruthless methods he's about to use. In his mind, it was do or die for the entire nation.
And the results? Honestly, they were jaw-dropping. The first five-year plan kicked off in 1928, and heavy industry output just went through the roof. We're talking about entire cities being built from nothing. In just a handful of years, the Soviet Union was on its way to becoming an industrial powerhouse at a speed that was just unheard of.
But, and you knew there was a but coming, right? And this one is massive. All of this so-called progress was built on a foundation of just unimaginable human suffering. The cost was astronomical.
So how did he fuel this industrial machine? Through a policy called collectivization. Basically, he ripped millions of peasants from their land and forced them onto these huge state-run farms. He declared all-out war on the so-called kulaks, the more successful peasants, and just wiped them out as a class. The state seized their grain to feed the new cities, leaving the very people who grew the food with absolutely nothing.
And the result? It was a famine, a completely man-made, catastrophic famine. Between 1932 and 1933, somewhere between 5 and 7 million people starved to death. In Ukraine, they call it the Holodomor, which means death by hunger. This wasn't a policy failure, it was a weapon. A human tragedy on an epic scale. And if you think things couldn't get worse, well, they did. As the 1930s went on, Stalin's paranoia just spiraled out of control, kicking off a whole new wave of terror. And all of this was happening right on the doorstep of the biggest war in human history.
From 1936 to 1938, he unleashed what's known as the Great Terror. He literally saw enemies behind every corner. It started with these public show trials, where he humiliated and executed the very guys who had helped start the revolution. But it didn't stop there. Oh no. It spread like wildfire. The secret police arrested military leaders, intellectuals, party officials, even regular people on completely made-up charges. Millions were shipped off to the Gulag, a brutal network of forced labor camps.
And get this, we're not even talking about the camps yet. Just direct executions. By shooting. In those 2 years alone, an estimated 700,000 people were killed.
I mean, can you even imagine living in that kind of fear? Where one wrong word could literally get you killed?
And then you have the foreign policy, which, wow, talk about whiplash. In 1939, he shocks the entire world by signing a non-aggression pact with Hitler, his sworn enemy. They even secretly agreed to carve up Poland between them. Then, boom, just a couple years later, after Hitler betrays him, there's Stalin, sitting down with Churchill and Roosevelt as one of the big three. That tells you everything you need to know, right? Total ruthless pragmatism.
And here's something we absolutely cannot forget. Even though he had basically gutted his own military leadership with the purges, Stalin still led the Soviet Union to victory in what they called the Great Patriotic War. But the cost, I mean, the number is just, it's hard to even comprehend. An estimated 27 million Soviet lives, soldiers and civilians. Let me be clear. The Soviet Union played the decisive role in defeating Nazi Germany on the Eastern Front.
So the war ends, and Stalin is on top of the world. But then, in 1953, he dies, and the floodgates just open. His own successor, Nikita Khrushchev, gets up and in a famous secret speech just lays out all of Stalin's crimes. It kicked off this whole process of de-Stalinization. Statues came down, prisoners were freed, but even after all that, the debate about him, it's still raging today.
So that brings us right back to where we started. What's the verdict? Was he a brilliant modernizer who built a superpower, or was he a monstrous tyrant who murdered millions? The impossible, complicated truth is, he was both.
And that's the core of it, isn't it? On one hand, you have the state builder, the wartime victor who forged a superpower. On the other hand, you have the mass murderer, who built that state on a foundation of bones. You can't separate the two. They are completely, brutally intertwined, two sides of the exact same coin.
Ultimately, looking at Stalin's life forces us to wrestle with a deeply uncomfortable question, one that still echoes today. What is the price of a nation's greatness? And who gets to decide if that price is worth paying?